then you've also got to think to yourself whether you're like what your role would be in wrestling. Not everyone's talents lend themselves particularly to being a commentator. Some people might be better suited as a referee. Some people, wrestlers, some people, there's loads of different roles within the wrestling industry.
What's going on, guys? It's your boy, Tom Talk Trash, and today I'm back for another interview. This time, I'm joined by the voice of British wrestling, Dave Bradshaw. So welcome to the show.
Hi, Tom. How are you?
I'm good. And as I said to you off camera, I'm really excited to chat with you, my friend.
Oh, well, I'm excited to chat with you. Let's get into it. It's going to be fun.
You said let's get into it. So let's get into it from the beginning. Where do you first discover wrestling, but as a fan?
Well, this is going to reveal how old I am, but it was 1991, and I was and I was at my cousin's house up in rural Yorkshire, and they had satellite TV, and my house did not have Sky TV at that point. And there was this my cousin was watching a video when I got to their house, and it was a recent not pay-per-view, but a recent UK only WWF show. It was UK Rampage 91, if anyone's seen that. And my first match I ever saw was Texas Tornado, Kerry Von Erich against full first match, because they're both very good wrestlers. So yeah, once I got into that was from then on in, I was hooked for life.
So you talked about being hooked for life there. When you first discovered wrestling, did your cousin have like a collection of DVDs that you were like, I'm borrowing this, I'm borrowing this, I'm borrowing this?
Tom, this is pre-DVDs.
Sorry, videotapes.
This is how long ago this was. No, it was just, to be honest, it was just getting big in like school anyway. But this is like May 91. And then by like the summer of 91, I remember like in the build up to SummerSlam 91, when it was, Macho Man was going to be marrying Miss Elizabeth, and like Hogan and Warrior were fighting Sergeant Slaughter and all this kind of stuff. By then it was like the talk of the playground anyway. So it was kind of like the big thing in, how like trends come and go, and when like yo-yos and rollerblades and all that kind of stuff. Well, wrestling was like, in the summer of 91, like wrestling was the thing. And so I got into it just about when everyone else was getting into it. But of course, like this was still at the time houses had Sky. So like if you were the kid in school who had Sky, and I wasn't, then everyone wanted to come around your house on Saturday morning and watch WWF Superstars or Wrestling Challenge or whatever the weekly shows were at the time. So that's how I got into it.
So as we move on a bit in the timeline, how does your fandom change as wrestling starts to decline? Sounds horrible, but I know what I mean. Like as wrestling in like 95, when wrestling is maybe not thought of as cool, how does your fandom change then?
I mean, it doesn't really. I guess. I mean, because I didn't get. So yeah, as I said, people didn't have. Most houses didn't have Sky. I got Sky as it happened at the start of like 97, and that was, as I'm sure you know, was just when things were about to start picking up again, right? And so I was, 94, 5, 6. I was doing what I was always doing, which was there was a guy at my dad's work who had Sky, so he was recording the pay-per-views for me. I was still watching it. I mean, by then it had, the school playground had moved on. Most of my friends didn't like wrestling anymore, but I don't know. I just never, once I was in, I never left. Like, a year after I started being a fan in summer of 92, I was at SummerSlam 92 at Wembley Stadium. And, it just blew my mind. It's the first time I'd ever been in a crowd that big. And then I just never I never stopped, and by the time '97 swung around, and then I could watch it on TV, but by then it was getting big again anyway, because the Attitude Era was coming in, Stone Cold, The Rock, and Triple H, all those guys. So I guess if you're my age, like, you sort of the product grew up with us, because when I was 8, like, the WWF was aimed at 8-year-olds. You know what I mean? Like Hulkamania and all that. And then by the time I was 14, 15, it was being aimed at teenagers, because it had become the Attitude Era. So I'm of that generation where like, I was always the demographic they were going for,
Yeah, definitely. So when the Attitude Era does come around, obviously with your work in commentary, how important do you think commentary was to the Attitude Era, or was to your fandom in general?
Well, not just the Attitude Era, but I mean all around. Like, I was watching something a few weeks ago. I had COVID for the first time, and so I was stuck at home.
Wow.
And so, like, I did that thing. I didn't even have it bad, but like, I was just doing the right thing, like, just staying at home. So I decided to feel sorry for myself, and got the duvet down from my bed and just, like, got laid up on the couch and decided to watch old WrestleManias and stuff on the network for about 3 days. And so I was watching. I was watching WrestleMania 19, right? So it was the third of the Rock Austin WrestleMania matches. And actually, I remember that match being incredible. And it kind of is, but like, finishing moves, all that kind of stuff. But what makes it incredible is JR. Like, JR sells that match like it's the biggest event in the history of sports.
Mm-hmm.
And by the time you get to the end, you're so hyped. And I realized, it's like, oh my God, that's almost all, no disrespect to Austin and Rock, who worked hard, but it's almost all Jim Ross who's whipped you up into that frenzy, and so I think JR in particular, I think people, I know people, do talk about him as the best of all time, but even saying that, I think people underestimate just how important Jim Ross was to that boom period in pro wrestling and in WWF in particular. But not just JR. So, like, again, if I look back on when I was first a fan, like, Monsoon and Heenan are a huge part of that as well. So, like, commentary throughout, I think, if it's done right, it adds a tremendous amount to pro wrestling.
Mm-hmm. So if we move on to sort of your commentary career, as I understand it, in 2008, you joined, and I need to pull up my notes because I feel like I'm going to butcher their name. I do apologize. You joined, is it IPW? I always feel like I say that.
Yeah, it's very good. Yeah.
You joined IPW. You joined IPW. So how does that opportunity come about?
Well, so by then I'm 25, and I've been to uni, and I did student radio at university. So I've kind of got into sort of, become confident talking on a microphone, all that kind of stuff. And I graduated uni by then, come back to sort of London area where I'm from, and decided, right, well, I'm going to get into a job, but I want to keep doing something on a microphone. What can I do? It's like, well, I could try wrestling commentating. So I just, looked up what wrestling promotions there were around where I was living, and there was one in Kent called IPW. So I called them up, see if they needed a commentator, and they didn't immediately, but they said, come to our shows and we'll see how things go. And then within 3 or 4 months, they gave me an audition, and by September that year, I was commentating for them. So I mean, it's a kind of one of those things where if you don't ask, you don't get. So I asked. Eventually, I got.
Yeah. So you talked about there, not if you don't ask, you don't get. What would your advice be to someone that is in the position you were in, where you're like, I want to do something, I want to give wrestling commentary a try? What would your advice be to, like, an aspiring commentator?
I mean, when I say don't ask, don't get, don't just ask it straight away. Do your homework, right? So try and find, particularly nowadays, because this, even back in 2008, things weren't like they are now with streaming and all that kind of stuff. So most promotions have content on YouTube or on an on-demand service or whatever. So you can find out quite a lot about promotions before you do anything now. And then you've also got to think to yourself whether you're like what your role would be in wrestling. Not everyone's talents lend themselves particularly to being a commentator. Some people might be better suited as a referee. Some people wrestlers. Some people. There's loads of different roles within the wrestling industry, obviously. So you've got to think like what suits your personality best, I think. And you might need to be brutally honest with yourself about that as well, because in some part of their brain, everyone wants to be the star of the show, right? Everyone wants to be the main event babyface who's going to be cheered by 50,000 people at WrestleMania and all that. But that's only one person can have that role in this ensemble cast that is a pro wrestling show. And it might not be that that's the best way for you to be cast. You might have a different role. You might be the comic relief character. You might be, you might just be the interviewer backstage who the wrestlers kind of sort of make themselves look good from being spoken to by. So there's loads of different roles, and you've got to figure out what it is that you would do best. You've got to then research that role. You've got to look how other people have done it. If you can, you've got to practice it. And then when you think you're ready, don't wait forever, because you're never totally ready. But eventually you pull the trigger and you say, right, I'm gonna ask someone, and hopefully someone gives you a chance.
You brought up there, not everyone makes a good commentator. So what are some qualities maybe that you're like, this is what makes a good commentator?
Well, it depends which type, obviously, as well, because there's, there's, for those who aren't familiar, there's
play-by-play, for example.
And there's color commentator. So yeah, play-by-play is the guy who calls the moves traditionally. So the Jim Ross type figure, the Michael Cole, that kind of guy. So which is what I do. And to do that well, I think you're probably the guy who's pushing it along, as in you're like, so the color commentator's role, well, depending on what kind of color commentator they are, but generally their role is to be funny or to be insightful or to just add some kind of color, right? Which is where the name comes from.
Yeah.
Play-by-play person is taking you from play-by-play, through the show, right? And not just in terms of the moves in the match, but from segment to segment. So it's your job to, lead the viewer into the commercial break, or to lead him onto the next segment, or to lead into the next video promo for the next match, or whatever it is. So if you're the type of person who's quite good at, I guess taking the lead is the wrong word, but being the person who is organized enough to hold it all together and confident enough to know when to draw a previous thing to a close and move things along, then play-by-play might well be for you. But obviously it's not just that. It's things like, are you good at explaining things? Can you, is your use of language good? Can you use words to get over the emotion of what you want the viewer to be feeling? All of those things, and without it just sounding like, you want to sound excited, but without it sounding like you're just an overexcited fan.
Yeah.
Nothing wrong with being a fan. There's 50 fans, right? Or in a big arena, there's at WrestleMania, there's 50,000 fans who are all screaming their head off, which is great, but we don't need a 50,001st person who just happens to have a microphone doing that. You want someone who's actually adding some kind of extra value by explaining what's going on, not just going, not just making noises on every move, but kind of saying words. And that's where some commentators maybe fall down sometimes, getting that balance between, yes, being as excited as the fans are, but also being a broadcaster, not just someone who's reacting like an audience member.
You brought up their commentators having to keep their composure at times during big moments. How do you make sure you keep yours during big moments when you're commentating?
It's not, I won't say keep your composure. You want to let your emotions.
That might have been the wrong word. I do apologize.
But it's more just like, it's more letting the emotions happen, but remaining articulate, which I'm not doing in giving this answer. You know what I mean? So it's like you're feeling an emotion at ringside because you're in the room and you're feeling the atmosphere, the same atmosphere the crowd is feeling. But of course, someone sitting alone in their house just watching it on the screen isn't necessarily getting that, right? And so if you can translate as much of that emotion to the viewer at home so they can get as close to the simulation to the feeling inside the building as possible, then that's when you're doing your job well. So you do want to, I'm not saying you should be detached emotionally from what's going on. You want to be involved emotionally, but you still want to remember that your job is to use words to get that across to the viewer, not just to make loads of excited noises and hope they understand.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying. So in 2011, you took a hiatus from wrestling to work on your master's degree, correct?
Yep.
What is your master's degree in?
Politics, political science.
Oh, wow. That's cool. Is there a reason for that? Did you want to go into politics or?
No, not really. I mean, I find it interesting. I did my undergraduate degree is in politics as well, and I worked in politics like as my day job for a while in the sort of mid 2000s and early 2010s and stuff. But no, I mean, to be honest, when I went to do my master's, I went and did it in the US, and it was partly because I just wanted to kind of experience American university life, having already experienced like British university life. And you got to remember as well, like 2011, the UK wrestling scene wasn't like it was even 2 or 3 years later.
Yeah.
So like, it wasn't like I was leaving a thriving scene that was like, oh my God, I couldn't possibly ever step away from this. It was okay in 2011, but it really wasn't like it was 5 years later. So it's like, I didn't feel like I was giving up anything, really massive to go and take a couple of years out and go somewhere else. Actually, it was in Florida was where I did my master's, but I didn't, even though that's where the performance center is and, NXT and all that kind of stuff is now, I didn't actually sort of do anything wrestling related while I was there. So I literally took 2.5 years where I did nothing to do with wrestling whatsoever. It was only when I came back into the UK in early 2014 that I was really pleasantly surprised by what had sprung up in a really kind of short period of time. Like Progress had taken off in London by then, and Rev Pro was doing great, and ICW in Scotland, and all of those things on the British scene, just with a level of professionalism and production values that just hadn't been there, in a very short time period beforehand. So it suddenly felt like, oh man, this has jumped up a notch, and you could just feel that British wrestling was kind of about to go into a boom period. And it was it was exciting to be back in it. That wasn't why I was back in the UK. It was by coincidence that I came back to the UK just as things were taking off. But I was like, okay, well, let's go back in because this sounds awesome. So I did.
So when you did come back in, what was some changes that you were like, this has changed in 3 years, but this is cool? And then what are some changes you're like, I miss this from 3 years ago?
Well, I mean, crowd sizes for one thing, it was just like, I mean, I remember there was always this, the common wisdom was in 2010, 2011 was, oh, you can't run in central London because the venues are expensive. There's too much competition from other things to do in the evenings or whatever. If you're going to try and run in Zone 1 in London, it won't work. And the guys who founded Progress, to their immense credit, decided, no, that's nonsense, and it can work. And so they made it work. And, through a combination of having the guts to do that, presenting a product that was, like what fans really wanted at the time. Again, production values, making sure they were on point, not kind of scrimping on anything, making it a sort of just feel aesthetically like a night out that was worthy of a London consumer. It made it a thing that was on a different level to almost everything that you'd seen before. On the flip side, I guess, what did you miss? It's like, well, as good as it is to be playing to By the way, I didn't do Progress. I'm just saying as a fan, Progress, but other companies as well that I was involved in, like it's there is something kind of cool about these small venues that you were sort of doing in 2008-9, where it's like 50 people in a scout hut. There is some and like just terrible production value, people walking through a curtain. It's all very basic, but like it can be quite fun. And so this sort of professionalization of everything was 99% of it's awesome, but occasionally you do just feel like, oh man, remember that time we did a hall with like 4 people watching, like and those there's some funny stories from doing that. So like it's they're just different. They're different experiences. I think it felt like being in a different world in 2014 to what it was in 2008.
Mm-hmm. And then how long after you were back in the UK did the Wrestle Talk Challenge opportunity come up?
Pretty quickly. So I was back in the UK in like Christmas 2013, start of 2014. First thing I really did once I was back was to do Jim Cornette came over for the first time
for a spoken word tour, correct?
Right. He'd never been to the UK before because Jim will tell you he's terrified of flying, right? So he has to load up on Xanax if he's gonna get on a plane. But he was coming to do 5 or 6 dates around the UK, and I ended up co-hosting those Q&As, which was great. So that was my kind of first big thing that got me back in, although that wasn't obviously particularly British wrestling. It was just a Q&A being held in Britain. And then over time, I started doing some on-screen interviews for Wrestle Talk. So like I did one with Bret Hart, which was amazing because he's a hero of mine. Various other people from WWE and TNA and all that kind of stuff. And then I started hosting a monthly show. So Wrestle Talk was in those days was a half-hour show on Challenge immediately after Impact on a Sunday night. So like 11 p.m. on a Sunday. And then for a while, once a month, like at 11:30. So after Wrestle Talk, we'd have a half-hour show called British Wrestling Roundup, which was, highlights from British shows, and I hosted that. So I just kind of gradually got more and more, work doing that kind of stuff, and kind of restarted doing some commentary bits, and just sort of, you just kind of get back into the flow of it, and once you get a couple of gigs, one thing leads to another, and before you know it, you're rolling again. So
So going back to Jim Cornette for a second, if we could, did he teach you anything about commentary that you now use in your work currently?
Yeah. Not that time, actually, because I didn't commentate with him then. But in 2016, I commentated with Jim on a show, which was for
WCPW, right?
Yeah, called What Culture Pro Wrestling at WCPW, who were getting big at the time. So we did a show where it was me and Jim commentating, and it wasn't live. It wasn't like on a live stream or anything. So we were able to talk between each match, so he could say, oh, do this different, do that different. And so he did, we quite often, like between each match, it wasn't like he was giving me loads of tips all the time. But for example, the first match was a tag match. It was Mustache Mountain, the Trent Seven and Tyler Bate against Johnny Moss, who's now a trainer with NXT, and Liam Slater. And really good tag match. But I did my thing that I'm a little bit prone to doing sometimes, which is, I get overexcited and I start, really kind of giving it some on all the high spots and all the near falls, which is good, but like you've got to maintain a level. Because Jim said this to me after the first match. The first thing he said, he goes, "Well, so you got a set of pipes on you, kids, or something?" And I'm like, "Yeah, thanks." And he's like, "Yeah, but just make sure you save a couple of gears for later in the show, right?" So in the same way that, you'll hear quite often people say about wrestlers that, you know what, if you're the first match on the show, don't do, every single high spot that you could possibly imagine. and leave nothing for the rest of the show. Because your job is to get the crowd in. You know, if you're the first match on the show, your job is to get the crowd into it, but to get them into a position that they're now going to go through all the peaks and troughs of the rest of the show. So hopefully that you build them up to their biggest crescendo for the main event, right? And in a way, what Jim was saying to me is that commentary's kind of like that. You know, you want if I've gone like if I've sounded like this was the craziest thing I've ever seen in the first match of the show, then I haven't got anywhere higher to go for the main event.
Yeah.
So you've got to, you know, yeah, it's good to be excited, particularly on a big spot in a match, even if it's the first match on the show. But you know, maybe keep that one in fourth gear so that you've got a fifth and a sixth to go to, you know, later on when you need to. So little things like that were really good. But you know, it was good because by the time I commentated with Jim, I'd obviously been friends with him for a couple of years, and so like it wasn't like he was just commentating with a stranger. Like he knew me and trusted me, and vice versa. So like there was enough of a rapport there that I knew he was giving me advice, you know, that I could trust. It wasn't that there was a good sort of basis of a friendship there. Good.
So you brought up there obviously Wrestle Talk and stuff. I'm curious to know from you, and working for them, once it came to an end and they moved over to the YouTube side and you now write for them for the magazine, how have you seen Wrestle Talk change since they moved over to YouTube?
Well, it's a difficult question because I didn't work for them as in at the time because they didn't have full-time employees then, right? Because they were just in 2014, whenever they were just a weekly show. So they were a production that filmed, but they weren't like, you know, it's not like now where it's a YouTube channel or group of YouTube channels that's bringing out content all the time, every day, and has full-time employees. So there wasn't a full-time employee then. So my job was to just, in a sense, I was freelance, right? Just coming in and whenever there was a recording day, recording some bits for them, and that's how I remained really, because most of what I have done in British wrestling is commentating, and so you know, and that's typically a freelance gig unless you get a contract with one of the big companies. So I've just been freelance. Even my articles that I started writing for the magazine, which I only started doing in 2020 during the pandemic, was just freelance, just doing it from home. So it's actually only in the past maybe 6 months that I'm sort of doing a lot more with them than just writing magazine articles. So now I see them, you know, now I go into the office a couple of times a week and I'm part of the team, and I can say, yeah, I mean, it's a proper structured company now with it's got obviously creative people who are on-air talent. There's full-time video editors. There's all of this sort of structure in place, which just didn't exist when it was a television show on Challenge. Because I mean, it's grown so much from then. What it is now. You know, I know it sounds great. Oh, it's a nationally televised TV show, and it was great for that time. But what Wrestle Talk is now is exponentially larger than what it was when it was a television show on satellite TV on a Sunday night.
Fair enough. So you brought up there getting a contract with one of the big companies. Which company? I know you're currently commentating for WXW. Which company would you like to work more with, maybe in the UK, or if we throw it out into the universe, which companies in the rest of the world would you like to work with a bit more?
I mean, you know, I don't know. You see where things go. Like I think I'm loving what I do with WXW. I've worked with them for 2.5 years now. I'm just about to don't know when this is going out, but the week we're filming this, I'm 3 days away from flying out there for my second 16 karat gold weekend, which is a 3-day knockout tournament they hold every year. It's sort of like their WrestleMania kind of thing. So I'm excited to go back out there. There's so professionally run WXW. Such like a good team. It's been one of the highlights of my career to be involved with them the last couple of years. So I hope that continues long into the future. But and I work with the German Wrestling Federation in Germany as well, GWF. I've just been out there last weekend doing. In fact, I got back this morning from Berlin doing one of their shows. So I'm very happy with what I get to do. In terms of like, I get to do the English commentary on some of the absolute best promotions in continental Europe. I do guys in Hungary, in Belgium, Poland as well. So like lots of different places. In the past I've done stuff I did some New Japan before, not directly for New Japan, but for a company that was distributing their content. So I got to commentate on New Japan stuff that was going to go out in English speaking countries. AAA and CMLL in Mexico. And it's all, it's all great, but it's all different. Like it's an entirely different experience commentating 2 hours of AAA compared to 2 hours of New Japan, as I'm sure you can imagine, because they're completely different styles. So, I don't know if one is better than the other. It's just, I'm a fan of like most wrestling fans. I hope, I'm a fan of good storytelling. Like, would I love to be commentating on the Bloodline Roman Reigns storyline in WWE? Of course I would, because if you don't want to be commentating on that, which is one of the best storylines we've seen in this industry for years, then what are you even doing here?
Yeah.
Do I want to be commentating equally? Do I want to be commentating on Bryan Danielson and MJF in a 60-minute Iron Man match on pay-per-view? Of course. Who doesn't want to do that? So you've got, I could list you everywhere I'd love to work, but I want to work everywhere where there's good pro wrestling and good storytelling. It's just, you've got to just go where the opportunities take you. And I've been very fortunate that I've had some really good ones.
I understand what you're saying completely. So you talked about the different styles of wrestling you've commentated. How do you make your style of commentary different for each promotion or event, if you do?
I don't know if I do particularly. Like, I think that's probably more something you have to do as a color commentator, because it depends on what dynamic the promoter, the booker wants between the two commentators. So my job is always to kind of be playing it down the middle. Obviously, I'm calling the action, but also in terms of like my moral position, my character's moral position, if you like. Obviously I'm outraged if ever a heel uses a weapon or cheats in some other way and all that kind of stuff. But my co-commentator, depending on who it is, it might agree with me. They might just be a straight down the middle analyst who's kind of a good guy, like the play-by-play commentator is, or it might be someone like we talked about WCPW. When I worked with, I worked with Alex Shane first of all, and then James R. Kennedy. Both of them kind of played a sort of a heel, sort of color commentator, and obviously that's a different dynamic, because then you end up with a sort of an argument, right? Because they're defending the heel.
Yeah.
And so there's that change in the play-by-play thing, but that's sort of that's kind of reactive to what the color commentator is doing. Other than that, I think what I do is obviously you change your tone slightly depending on the type of match. If you're calling a very sort of technically proficient traditional pro wrestling match, your style might be slightly more sports based in presentation than if you were calling a street fight. And if you were calling a some kind of comedy match, then you'd probably do it a little more lighthearted. But basically with play-by-play, I don't think there's too much variation apart from in reacting to what's in front of you and the person you're working with.
You brought up there the color commentator next to you and some of the greats that you've worked with. So if we throw it out into the universe, who are some current color commentators that you're like, I'd love to work with them, I haven't had the chance to work with them, and who have been some of your favorites to work with?
Okay, I'll deal with that second part first. So James R. Kennedy, as much as I despise him as a human being, obviously, he me and him had a really good rapport at What Culture, and then it became Defiant Wrestling, but we worked well together. Actually, I really like working with Wade Barrett. We called him Stu Bennett in Defiant and What Culture, but and I'm really pleased that he's doing great stuff on SmackDown now. I think him and Michael Cole, I think, are the best duo on television right now for commentary. Probably, it's close, but I think there's a good case for saying that. So that he's great. Actually, I worked a couple of times with Matt Stryker and thought he was fun. He's fun in a different way because he's like he's more of he does that kind of analyst thing rather than a heel sort of thing, and that but he is very like his mind for pro wrestling, I think, is underrated. Like, when we're commentating, we have like a monitor on the table in front of us, and what he's doing that the viewers can't see but I can see because I'm sitting next to him, is he's like pointing at different things, just on the screen. He's like at the way that one guy is like manipulating another guy's elbow joint. He's sort of just constantly evaluating the action that he's seeing in front of him in a way that on a sort of a level that I think maybe most people aren't. So he's a really interesting guy. People I'd love to work with, obviously, like some of my heroes are people like JR, who I said. Michael Cole, I think, is great. Mauro Ranallo, I think, is great. But they're not really people I would work with because you wouldn't have two play-by-play guys, So in terms of color commentator, I mean, obviously he's no longer with us, but if I could travel back in time and work with Bobby Heenan, that would be an absolute dream. I really think Corey Graves as well, I think is cool. I mean, there's loads. I just think the thing with commentary is there's no one way to do it, right? There's so many people who bring so much to it in their own unique style. Like, one person who I think was, again, no longer with us, but who I think was really quite underrated on color commentary is Roddy Piper. Like, his level of excitement on some of these otherwise kind of mediocre like WWF pay-per-view matches in the early 90s. Again, much like I was saying with JR and that Rock Austin match, like sometimes good commentary can draw you into something that otherwise you really wouldn't be necessarily that interested in. And I think there's more than one way to do that. But if you're a commentator who, in whatever way you get there, is able to kind of figure out how to do that in a way that that engrosses the audience, then you've struck gold.
Definitely. So I am curious to know, as we look at wrapping this up, how do you protect your voice and for things like that? If you're going to do a lot of commentating and bits like that, how do you make sure that you don't show up and like can't do your job, for lack of a better word?
You know what? It never used to happen ever. I was just a bit younger and my vocal cords were a bit more flexible or whatever. Like, now occasionally I can feel it cracking particularly if I've done several nights in a row or whatever. So hydration, drink lots of water, like throat lozenges, even if you haven't got a sore throat, like having a Strepsil before you go out kind of seems to make things a little better. There are some vocal exercises you can do where you sort of make the sort of, but it does sound ridiculous. Like, you can kind of go like, you can make the sort of A sound like A, and then you can go from like really low to really high, just making that same noise and just seeing where on that scale your voice cracks and just trying to hold it there. Just trying to train your voice. You can do it with like other vowel sounds as well. You can do it like with an E and all this kind of stuff. But because because it sounds so weird, I kind of try not to do that unless I'm struggling, So no, just drink lots of water and just be sensible about it. Like, for example, like I said, I'm going to Germany this week, and I'm going to be doing 6 shows in 3 days. which is a lot, right? And so normally when I commentate WXW, obviously I normally do it in post production anyway, but it's just me, and I don't think that's really plausible if you're doing 6 shows in 3 days, because if you're the only person talking, then by show 6 you're not going to have a lot left, right? So fortunately, when I go there and do that kind of number of shows in a short period of time, they always put me with someone, give me a color commentator, which partly is because I think it's better anyway. I think a 2-man booth is better than, or 2-person booth is better than a 1-person booth anyway, because you've got someone to bounce off. But the other reason they do that is because otherwise, by the final show, which obviously is the most important show because it's the final tournament, you still want the play-by-play commentator to have something resembling a voice left, and so just kind of being smart and sort of pacing yourself if you're doing a lot of stuff over a short period of time, and yeah, drink lots of water.
You talked about their solo commentary. So how is your work different when you are solo commentating?
I think, I've done a lot of it now on my own, so it's but it's not as challenging as it maybe used to be, because you just get used to it. But it is harder because, again, not only because you don't have anyone to bounce off of, but also it's just super intense, right? Because you're the only person carrying that in terms of the commentary. So you're the only person to call what's going on, and to have to do that for a 3-hour stint potentially for a show without anyone to have a conversation with is a different skill, I think, to being able to have a rapport with someone in a 2-person booth. So how you do it, to be honest, I can't think of any off the top of my head. I can't think of any like great tips for how you do it. You just sort of learn through practice, I guess, over time. I've done hundreds of hours of that now, so it's like, well, at some point you figure out what your style is going to be and how to just pull that off in a way that is different to if you were doing with 2 people or 3 people.
I understand what you're saying completely. And as we look at wrapping this up, because I do want to be respectful of your time, we are going to do a quick segment that I call generic questions. Those of you that have seen my interviews before will know this is where I ask my guests questions they're probably asked on social media quite regularly, such as their favorite match, favorite pay-per-view, favorite wrestler's theme, favorite tag team, and favorite wrestler. So basically, you will never have to answer them again, Dave, all being well. So, sorry?
Go on. Yeah, I'm ready.
So what's your favorite match of all time?
Oh, man. I'm biased because I was there and I was a kid and it's a big childhood memory, but Bret and Bulldog, SummerSlam 92.
Right off the top of his head. What about favorite pay-per-view?
My favorite period in WWE history is the year 2000. I think was an amazing streak of great stuff. What's the best pay-per-view from then? SummerSlam, maybe? SummerSlam 2000? Top to bottom. Not. I don't think that's like, there's better matches. If you pick the best match from that year, you've got like Triple H and Cactus Jack from the Rumble and various other things. But I think as a top to bottom presentation for 3 hours, SummerSlam 2000.
Favorite wrestler's theme?
Oh, Bobby Roode. Glorious. I love it.
An answer we don't get often.
I play that's one. It's on my playlist for if I'm like, if you're like psyching yourself up, getting ready for a night out or something. I play it. I have it. Just go glorious. I think it's amazing. It's the best.
That's so cool. What about your favorite tag team?
My favorite tag. Oh, the Hardys, probably.
You're the first person that seems prepared for these questions, and I absolutely love it.
Oh, I have. Well, I promise you, I haven't prepared for them, but
I love it. And then finally, as we wrap this up, who is your favorite wrestler of all time?
I don't know. That's hard. Depending on what day you ask me, like some days, possibly sometimes Bret Hart, sometimes Randy Savage. Who else? I mean, Mick Foley in terms of promos and stuff. There's a lot. Like there's loads. Yeah, that one I would struggle because I mean it's like, yeah, how do you pick?
Fair.
Yeah.
Fair enough. And then as we wrap this up, the question I end all my interviews on is with YouTube, with podcasting, with commentary in your case, and with social media in general. We're all sort of going to live forever in some sort of very weird way. So what is one piece of content you want to be remembered for, and one that you're like, if you could block that from your mind, I would appreciate it.
I want to be remembered for. God, I don't know. I mean, I just hope. I've been fortunate enough to be around the British scene and the European scene for 15 years now, and hopefully a long time still to come. Seeing what's being there as it's changed and evolved, and I hope that my commentary just in some way adds some excitement for people. I know that's a really vague answer, but I just hope that I hope that it's adding something rather than being an irritation for people, and I hope that people feel like that my contribution is as small as it is compared to what the wrestlers are doing is in some way helpful. In terms of piece of, I do remember when we did with What Culture Pro Wrestling, we did something called the Pro Wrestling World Cup, which was a 64-man. So I can't remember if there were any women in it. 64-person knockout tournament thing that was held over a number of months. We got to the big live stream for the final show. We're down to the semi. It's going to be the semis and the final on that show. So we're down to four men in the finals, the semi-finals, and I'm doing a piece to camera for the start of it, where you go, oh, we're live in wherever we were, Manchester, and tonight one of these four men is going to win the World Cup. Will it be? And then I started listing the four, but I can't remember who I forgot. But I said three of them and then couldn't remember the fourth.
Oh no!
And like an awkward pause where I looked down at my paper to remember who the fourth person was, and so that's one of the more awkward show opening pieces to camera I've ever done, and it was quite an important show, so I was a little bit embarrassed by that.
Oh no, that shouldn't be funny, but I find that quite funny. I'm not gonna lie.
I mean, in hindsight, it's when I look back I haven't looked back at it for a long time, but like I find it a little while afterwards, I look back and I was like, yeah, all right, it didn't ruin the show or anything. It's not that important, but at the time when that happens, you're a bit mortified.
Definitely. But as we wrap this up, where can the good people find you, your commentary, and anything else you want to plug?
Well, commentary-wise, as you say, I do various. So WXW. You can find WXW now is now on YouTube. You can pay to watch the content on there. You can find me commentating the German Wrestling Federation in Berlin, Passion Pro in Hungary, Bodyzoy in Belgium. PTW sometimes I've done in Poland. In the UK, I'm doing Riot Cabaret in London, which is great. I'm doing Pro Wrestling Chaos down in Bristol, and I do PEW, Phenomenal Elite Wrestling, in Stratford-upon-Avon. So that's my commentary. Wrestling-wise, obviously I'm on Wrestle Talk and their related channels, including I write for Wrestle Talk magazine. You can see me on the Wrestle Talk YouTube channel, etc., etc. I'm everywhere. It's probably annoying. Can't get rid of me.
It's definitely not. Someone that I've become a fan of recently, but someone that has always also been very nice to me. So I appreciate that as well. But as we wrap this up, guys, make sure you like, share, and subscribe to the channel if you like this video. Follow me on Twitter @TomTalkTrash, and I will see you in the next one. A goodbye now.